bit fluffy.
Hello, Rebecca. How's it going?
Great, thank you. Hello, thank you for having me.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure. I'm really excited to have you with us today, and hello to everybody watching, and welcome to our third series of Scale Up Live. And our topic this round is all about getting out of a growth slump, something we spend quite a lot of time talking to our clients about, and equally have experience of this kind of quite stressful stage of scaling a new business. And actually, really, these kind of periods of slow growth for businesses are not uncommon, and can be very stressful. And actually, so often businesses talk about their successes, but really rarely talk about some of the challenges and kind of how they overcame them. And so it feels like a really interesting topic for us to kind of get stuck into this series, kind of focusing on that. Why does it happen, and what can you do to kind of to get out of it? So before we get stuck in, Rebecca, do you just want to kind of give a quick intro on you for our audience today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so I am Rebecca Morley, and I am an executive coach and leadership development specialist, and I work with scaling and fast growth businesses who invariably have the challenges that you've just set out. I work with those businesses, and predominantly I work with senior leaders in those businesses. So I work with CEOs, MDs, founder CEOs and their teams. And usually it's their first time in those roles, because that's the nature of scaling up and fast growth. Kind of coming in to grow a business from potentially something quite small to something a lot bigger, and trying to create what is business as usual, which is a really, really interesting journey. So
yeah, absolutely. And so just in terms of kind of setting the scene for what we're talking about here, I think this kind of growth slump phase is that kind of stage where when you first launch, or kind of those first early months, maybe even years in some cases, you've kind of got that steady early excitement around what you're doing. Growth seems to be heading in the right direction, and you know, those growth numbers month on month sound huge when you're going from tens and hundreds into the thousands, and then suddenly things start to slip, or targets start to get missed. Could just be a couple of weeks at first, doesn't seem too bad, it's just kind of one of those things, and then that becomes more and more of an ongoing issue, and weeks become months potentially, and things aren't course correcting themselves. And as I said, it's such a common part of the journey for many scale up businesses, and really helping people understand how to handle those situations feels like a really interesting area for us to touch on. Certainly, and from my own experience of working in a startup and going through this growth slump, I wish I had had people to turn to talk about it, because it's such a stressful sort of phase where you're suddenly going about your day every day feeling really good about everything, to suddenly questioning everything you're doing and not really knowing where to start. And that the first question is, I suppose, is just, why does it happen? Why does that we go from those kind of good steady growth to suddenly slowing? From your experience, what have you seen the causes of that to be?
Well, when we were prepping for this session, it was interesting kind of spending a bit of time thinking about that question, actually, because I think it's really easy to see any kind of change, any kind of growth slump as being indicative of such a bigger problem. Well, that's it. We've had our day now, that we're reaching the point at which our magic's gone, and all of those amazing things that were happening are no longer happening. And I think all of that sort of thinking puts you totally out of control of the situation straight away. The minute you start to think that it's it's external factors, or the wave that you've been cresting is kind of crashing, you start to almost lose hope in the situation. And that starts, I think, for you certainly as the leader of that business, talking about kind of working with leaders. It's really easy to think that it's something that you've done wrong. I think the first thing to remember is always that, you know, businesses broadly go on a growth trajectory, but that's never linear, ever. You know, and so as well as those huge highs, you'll see those lows as well. But as long as you're broadly following the right trajectory, actually you can prevent yourself from panicking. You can prevent yourself from kind of totally losing hope and thinking it's all of those external factors that are suddenly contributing to an out and out failure, right? And so as a leader, the key is to try and see the bigger picture and to take that leadership position of helping the business to maintain perspective and see the bigger picture. So in terms of what happens, to answer your actual question, I think there's loads of different reasons why it happens. You know, you kind of and you need to look as a business at all of those different potential reasons. Usually, in my experience, both running my own business, helping other people who are running businesses, and being in really, really big businesses who still experience these kind of growth swings. I've been in 360 million, 600 million, £1 billion businesses that all have this, right? And the key to remember is that it's usually a perfect storm. Different things that will all come together at once to create that situation. So that can be, you know, competitors coming onto the market. It can be a shift in market conditions. It can be seasonal shifts that you've never experienced before. It can be customer sentiment. It can be so many different things that can create these, even a change in algorithm, depending on where your business is kind of most often seen. And so, the bigger picture, again, is really, really important to keep coming back to on that basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, because I think there's so many situations where you're kind of, as a business, looking at those kind of weekly numbers every beginning of every week, kind of assessing a performance and really being guided by those, and almost forgetting everything that went before.
Exactly.
And kind of putting those numbers in the context of of what's happening, and as you say, looking at those over, not just sort of panicking at that first week where you see a dip, but having the patience to sort of look at and see whether that is a trend that does need to be addressed, or whether actually it was just simply just one of those weeks, which just does happen sometimes. And actually,
because I think that the leaders that I work with that are the best in kind of managing growth and pushing for results are obsessed with the numbers, absolutely obsessed with the numbers, you know, leading from the front with having that total obsession over, you know, what you're selling, how you're doing, what results you're getting, what's coming through the tills effectively. But as many weaknesses that leaders have, you know, that can be a really overplayed strength at times. So the obsession with the numbers, I mean, they're really thrown off emotionally when the numbers, like you say, if you're checking them weekly, even daily, even hourly, some of the leaders I've worked with, like, literally in the numbers, checking them at 1 o'clock in the morning. That's great. And that, you know, especially in those early days, sets a really good tone for the business of, you know, obsessed with results, which is where you get that success. But actually, when that becomes an overplayed strength, it's that actually you have that emotional flooding that goes with those numbers. And so that obsession needs to be focused on the right things. It's about getting the results rather than being totally thrown when you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know from my own experiences in this, kind of going through this as well as working with other businesses, is that actually sometimes looking just kind of hard and fast at the numbers you look at every week in those kind of reporting meetings can actually send you off in the wrong direction, because you're kind of looking actually at the wrong numbers. They're the kind of the numbers that you use to assess top level performance, but they don't necessarily tell you what's going on, and that's the ones that are driving those results and the outcomes that you're looking for. And I think that's kind of my biggest kind of learning from that was to really take a massive step back and go, I'm going to stop looking at those numbers because they're not actually really telling me anything. I'm just obsessing over them and like you say, checking them every hour to see if they've magically changed.
Pressing repeat, refresh.
Yeah, literally, like, it must be a bug, surely. But actually really taking a massive step back to look at both internal and external factors and kind of do a bit of a bigger picture assessment of like you mentioned, are there any competitors that we need to be aware of? Are there things changing over there that might be impacting us? Is there some seasonality at play? Is there a market shift we need to recognize and adapt to? And internally, are our resources stopping us from scaling? Or are we just really lacking from product market fit point of view, which is totally normal as well in those early years? Is our pricing right? All of these things. It's kind of like taking a big old step back and a deep breath and kind of looking at that bigger picture and trying to hone in on the right areas.
Yeah, and actually I think, I said to you again in the prep for this session, I used to manage sales and operations planning for really big businesses, and I think, the other thing to remember is to start to look at whether actually, well, two things actually. Is your business cyclical? So is there a cycle of customer demand that you haven't seen before because you've been launching so many products? You're in that sort of really fast growth mode where it's throw everything to see if it fits and if it sticks. And actually you lose sight of a lot of trends when you're doing that. So once things are settled down and you've established your customer base, you've established your product, actually there probably are some cycles that start to emerge that you may not have seen before that you need to start to pay attention to. And actually looking at those cycles can give you a lot of information about what your next innovation should be, because actually within those cycles your customers will be looking for their next product from you. Well, if you're panicking about why you're not shipping this product at the time, you can miss all that information. So it's really important within that kind of looking at bigger picture to take yourself out of the detail of what's currently happening and think about where the whole customer journey and look at what your customers are expecting from you next, and like you say, really start to talk to your customers about what's happening for them as well.
That's a really, really interesting point. And I think that ultimately talking to customers has got to be kind of the number one way to start kind of identifying this challenge as well. Just going straight back to kind of basics in terms of focusing on that research piece and trying to understand. So, even just looking at customer reviews and how they've evolved can be really insightful, actually. Just looking at how people are talking about your product and the kind of language they're using and those sort of things can actually lead to a huge amount of interesting nuggets that could be quite powerful. Customer interviews, I'm such a big believer in customer interviews. It's probably the one thing that I found really helped me out in so many challenging situations, just picking up the phone and just having some good honest conversations with people. It's so kind of often overlooked, isn't it? So simple, but so powerful, just going right back to the customer and just asking them what's going on and if any of that what's changed for them, and using that to try and drive some answers.
Absolutely. I work with a great CEO who goes through their Instagram DMs periodically and will just phone people up or DM people and find out more about what they're saying. Customer feedback. He just wants to know what's really going on and finds out so much good information from them about what they need to be focusing on. It is so important.
Absolutely. And one of someone I used to work with before, they were going through this exact thing, and they set up some sort of exit intent pop up on their website to try, because they were getting loads of traffic but no one was doing anything, so they were trying to figure out sort of what's going on. We're obviously selling something people are interested in because they're coming to us, but they're not converting. And just through simply setting up some exit interviews on their website, they found out that their pricing was just totally out of whack, and they just got that feedback time and time again. So they just spent a week doing that, running that, getting that feedback, and then we're able to really unlock a whole kind of new model for the business. And I know that's probably a really unique example of where it was actually quite not simple per se, but they were lucky enough to kind of get quite a clear answer quite quickly. But again, it just goes back to talking to customers and
Yeah,
finding any way to actually hear from them what's stopping them from making that decision,
yeah.
so that they can move. What about the sort of emotional side of it? And I'm particularly interested in your thoughts here, because I probably could have done with some of this guidance back in the day, because I definitely found it was one of those situations where, you know, especially being in a head of marketing role, everybody's looking at you going, where are the numbers gone? Why aren't we growing? What's happening? And to a degree, that kind of pressure and kind of feeling of failure becomes so all-encompassing that it's so detrimental to the whole process. It's really hard to move forward when you're not in the right mindset.
Yeah, it's really tricky, and it's your least creative state, right? When you're feeling like that, you know, and actually need creativity, and you need to be able to be a critical thinker, and you need to be able to be great at problem solving, and feeling like that is just not a generative state at all.
No.
So, you know, when I'm working with people that are in that situation, we talk a lot about something called the victim triangle. And so what that is called the drama triangle, actually, but we call it the victim triangle. So the 3 points of that, one is victim, and you've also got perpetrator and rescuer. And I think it's really easy when you're going through a growth slump to see yourself in victim mode and either see the customer or your supplier or the market in general or just circumstances as this perpetrator, as this big bad wolf creating this issue for you, and kind of looking for a rescuer, you know, something will come along and save us. And actually, you know, that's a good description for that really non-generative state. And what we were saying earlier about kind of giving away all of your control, because actually when you're in victim mode, you're in that sort of blaming mode and waiting for somebody to come and save you. And really the only way to get out of that, and that's this model kind of talks about this as well, is to think about future state. So going right, again, bigger picture, going right back into focusing on the mission. Where are you ultimately trying to get to? What's the bigger picture, longer term journey that you're on? And really seeing any kind of growth slump as being just another part of that longer term journey to get where you're going. And really taking yourself out of the situation and thinking about things in terms of bigger picture, and actually, you know, accepting the situation you're in, kind of almost not welcoming it, but, you know, kind of not fighting with that growth slump, because you can waste a lot of energy fighting with that sort of perpetrator, that big bad wolf. Accepting the situation you're in and really going back to bigger picture. What are we trying to achieve here? What's the business we're trying to create? What's the value we're trying to give to our customers? What's the quality offer? What you know, what are the fundamental pillars of what we're doing? And that can really take you out of this kind of emotional victim mode of, oh, this is terrible, this is bad, this is happening to me. Really put you back in control and put you into far more generative state of thinking, how do I get back into that mission? How do I get back into really offering value to the customer, into really building trust, into building loyalty, you know, that, you know, your instinct to talk to the customer in the situation you described to me is really all about that. It's, you know, well, let's find out from the people that really matter here, which is the people we're creating this for, producing this for, or serving our market. And so, coming out of that victim mode, getting back in control, really, and kind of thinking about yourself in the bigger picture, and then really thinking about what you can do to start back on that journey. You know, that sort of tailspin energy can really be de-energizing. It can be really difficult to keep moving forward. So thinking about, you know, I've got some nice coaching cards that have got this kind of thing on you, like thinking about what you can do to start. What can you do to start taking steps in the right direction and get back into that more positive frame of mind and taking positive action? Because you can get really lost in the data of what's happened, how is this happening? like I said earlier, it is always a perfect storm. There's always lots and lots of different things that will have happened to create a growth slump. Actually, that knowing that can often make you feel even more out of control, because it's so many different things that have happened. And so actually just finding a way to move forward is key. And if you're the leader in that situation as well, really role modeling, continuing to move forward and continuing with the mission that you're on, really heading towards that vision is going to be what energizes the team and gets them coming up with creative ways of going forward. And I think the other thing, actually, just talking to somebody the other day in a 360 about this, and he's grown and scaled and exited quite a few businesses. He was talking to me about growth slumps. I'd forgotten about that when I was prepping for this, but he was saying kind of creating these sprints as well, and kind of rather than focusing on the bigger picture, but then thinking, okay, what's that first step we can take to head back towards that bigger picture, that vision? Maybe creating a 1 month, 3 month, 6 month goal, depending on kind of the way your business works, and kind of getting galvanized around, okay, well, let's put that to one side, the growth slump that we've kind of been going through, really start to talk about future state and get everyone galvanized around a short-term goal and get everybody kind of moving and fizzing something we can achieve within the bigger picture.
I think that's a couple of points there, actually, and things that you just said. So I think just on that last one, that kind of setting smaller kind of goals and working in that sprint way is a really interesting way of doing it, because I agree that kind of getting that energy back into the we've achieved something, and we actually made progress is a really important energy to kind of galvanize again, to get everybody out of that kind of victim mindset and thinking more creatively about how to solve that bigger challenge by taking little bite-sized steps towards it. And you also mentioned before about ultimately delivering value. Like, so many times I've seen we're working with founders or working within businesses where they're so focused on the numbers, kind of forgotten about the value they're supposed to be delivering for customers in a way. And actually focusing on that can be a really good way of unlocking that growth again, because really that's what you've got to do. But when you get to a point where you're so obsessed about signups or revenue or whatever, you kind of focus really on those and forget about the ultimately what are you doing? What are you doing to deliver value that generates that revenue ultimately? And it's kind of going back to first principles of going, right, what are we doing and how can we do it better in terms of delivering value to our customer? And I found that a really useful framework to think through in terms of solving the challenge of not how do I get more signups, but how do I better serve this group of people that we're targeting? What do they need and what can I do to help them get that? And not every idea works, of course, but it's a different way of kind of looking at how to solve the problem that creates more, I found, to be much more of a creative jumping off point than kind of going, got to hit those numbers. It's kind of like, right, let's put our customer back into the heart of our thinking. And kind of come together to think about how we can deliver new and exciting ways of engaging with them.
Because the cost of selling to an existing customer is so much lower than acquiring new ones, essentially. So if you're in a growth slump, your focus wants to be margin, and actually selling to existing customers is going to be more margin accretive than finding new ones, actually. And so actually looking at that whole customer journey rather than just acquisition and how do we get new customers through the door, and thinking about loyalty and selling more to existing clients is going to be absolutely something else you need to focus on, as well as obviously getting people through the door. But it shouldn't always be about new clients, new customers.
No, absolutely. And that's another kind of important element, so particularly when you say looking at that whole customer journey and looking at that kind of full funnel metrics of going, particularly if there's a kind of retention or loyalty issue that's happening, then it is going to be way more expensive to hit those top level numbers if you're not able to keep people. And actually knowing, like you say, again, kind of breaking it down into what the smaller bits we can focus on, really narrowing in on should we be focusing on that kind of real top of funnel, bringing brand new people in, or should we be focusing further down and looking at that kind of value creation, loyalty? And again, it's all things you've got to look at your own numbers to decide what's kind of right for your business. But too often I see businesses trying to do them all at once and getting frustrated with the lack of progress. And I can completely sort of empathize with that desire to make progress quickly and make loads of progress overnight, but it's just about being realistic, I suppose, as well, isn't it? And kind of managing your own expectations, and then creating the right environment for the people around you to do their best work.
Yeah, absolutely. And being patient to an extent as well, because it takes time to make change happen. And a lot of the issues I see for leaders who are dealing with adversity, whether that's growth slump or anything else, actually, they set the direction of travel, they give the team priorities, they set them on a course, and sort of, well, they don't sit back, but figuratively
get out the way,
hopefully. If they don't see the results quickly enough, they run straight back down into the detail and create bottlenecks left, right, and centre, which actually slows it down further. And that impatience is a really kind of vicious cycle to get into if you're dealing with your impatience by wading in and trying to get involved to speed things up. Ultimately, you have completely the wrong, the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve. And it's really tricky for your team, because then they lose trust in your ability to trust them. They get less creative, they get less agile, and that that whole swirl is really de-energizing and not what you want at this stage. So it's really important to keep focusing the team on the mission, and set them up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really, I can really sort of resonate with that point of that kind of the job of the kind of the senior leadership team in this is really setting that direction, reminding everybody kind of what we're here for and what we're trying to do, and ideally kind of setting the focus on kind of where should we be focusing, and kind of help define some of those smaller steps of expectations and progress to make, and then getting out of the way to let the team be creative, rather than, as you say, actually giving them things to do, like kind of dictating okay, right, I've had an idea, go and execute this, because actually I think that's what's going to solve it. Because I experienced that firsthand, and it just kills the team, because basically then the team end up debating why they don't think they should be doing it, but getting on and doing it anyway, because they're kind of under this directive that they have to, but they don't agree with it. But I don't think they're ever going to. You hire people into these roles because you think they're good at their job, and then if you undermine them by just dictating what they should do every day, it's kind of this whole mess of distrust, I suppose, that starts to be created.
I've been there too. I've been kind of set a mandate, find however much of a gap in the P&L, go do, only to come back 3 days later and the person who set the challenge says, "Oh, don't worry, I've sorted it," and they haven't really sorted. They've put their finger in the dike instead of actually sorting. But it's really frustrating, and it means you don't bother next time, or you certainly don't put your best effort into it next time. Yeah,
absolutely. And in terms of, I suppose, some of the practical things that people can do in these situations, I think you made a couple of great points already in terms of breaking it down into those much smaller kind of make weekly sprints or objectives to kind of get people excited around progress again, and making things feel more achievable, and just clear focus, right? Giving people that kind of satisfaction of going, I know exactly what I'm meant to be doing, and I've got the space and time to think creatively about how to solve that challenge week to week. Another thing that I found particularly useful was doing some kind of team workshopping around some of these challenges. So we would get cross-functional teams from across the business to do kind of workshops around whatever we sort of identified as the main challenges we needed to overcome, go and have breakout sessions to come together, different experiences, skills, mindsets, to come and think around what some of the creative solutions we could do to solve that particular challenge. And we also found going off-site really helpful, going somewhere completely new where we're not tainted by or tempted to look at the numbers, or fall into bad habits of helping someone on the desk next to you with something, but going into a completely new space where you've got complete freedom of thought and just really dedicating good day or half day together to just sitting in a room and getting those kind of creative juices flowing and trying to come up with some new and bold ideas. I think that's the other thing that one of my other biggest learnings was to not focus so much on optimizing, but focus on bigger, bolder ideas. Because if you're just tweaking what you've already got, chances are you're never going to get the exponential results that you really want. You're just going to fine tune and squeeze a little bit more juice out. But really, if in this sort of situation, you've got to be thinking, right, what do we do that we've not done before or not tried before that will really help us unlock that next stage of growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's about what do you need to stop doing as well.
Yes.
In order that you can do those bigger things. So really looking at it from both sides of, what sometimes growth slumps are caused, especially when it's as part of a scale-up journey, caused by complete dilution of the organization. You've got to a point where you're not just 4 or 5 people running a business anymore. You've got critical mass and you can do lots more. And so you try and do everything all at once. And actually, even though you're putting loads more things out there and you've got the capability to create a lot more, that doesn't actually add up to the results you want, because you are diluting your own kind of capabilities. And it can sometimes be about, right, what do we need to stop doing so that we can focus on the really good stuff to take us forward?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a
very brave leadership mole kind of move. When you're in a growth slump, to say, right, we'll stop doing some stuff. It feels logical, but it's it can be really important.
Absolutely. I'm conscious of time. I could talk with you on this for hours.
It's fun, isn't it?
But it's just such an interesting topic, and
it's fascinating.
Thank you so much for coming on to talk with me about it today. Some really useful tips shared with there, so thank you. And we'll be sending out a kind of summary of those in our newsletter later this week as well. So thank you so much, and we'll probably continue talking about this over coffee sometime.
Yeah, I hope so. Until then.
All right. Have a good afternoon, Rebecca.
So Take care.
Thank you. Bye.